So today what we're going to do is we're going to go into the health trifecta, understanding the 3 core components that you need to understand to get your body back on your side over 40. If you're seeing things slow down, you don't have the energy like you used to, your sleep's not what it used to be, or you're just not seeing the results from the efforts you're putting in, I want to break this down into 3 core elements that we use with all of our clients, and we've used successfully now with over 1,000 clients. We're going to dive deeper and actually allow you to build some action steps out of today. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up on the iPad and really break this down into understanding what this actually looked like as a next step. So what we're going to do is get in, one of the biggest things that we're trying to get an idea of is realizing that you either get to work with your biology or you're working against it. And understanding what that looks like took me a really, really long time, right? I really very much started as the fitness guy, right? I was mountain biking, I was playing polo, I did the motorsport stuff, and I even got on stage quite a few times and did the bodybuilding shows and got in really, really lean shape after doing a lot of different sports. So I saw this through multiple disciplines, right? Whether it was more dynamic on the bike, working with another animal on a horse, or really getting into really dialed in shapes on stage. There was a lot of components that I learned through that and the nuances of all of them. But when life hit, and once I got out of the fitness space and started to understand what this looked like in the real world, going through running a fitness business, being part of a tech startup, trying to find a house, long-term relationships, trying to maintain workouts, all of this stuff that all of you guys, this is nothing special to me, that we all have to go through. And once that really hits, we really start to realize how much stuff that we're looking after on a day-to-day basis. We really need to take the time to understand how we fit health back into the day. So we're understanding a lot of these real obstacles that come through, like anxiety around gyms, guilt around food, stress and sleep schedules, overwhelm around the contradictory information of fitness out there, or even the self-inflicted demands that we place on ourselves to really make sure we've got to do a good job with family, with work, with just generally trying to keep on top of all. There's a lot of stuff out there. So when we dive into this and looking at beyond the macros and dumbbells approach, it's not just food consumption, right? Eating less and training harder. We've got to look at hormone function, stress. We've got to look at daily activity. Are we moving through the day? Higher quality sleep. Actually looking at maintaining, if not building, some sort of muscle. Looking at eating and timing of nutrients is really powerful. And then looking at overall cellular health as well. So really diving into this and understanding, working with the best, there was so much more that had to be unpacked to really understand how we can get your body back on your side and understand what's actually involved in that process. And I started to really feel like I was getting it all together, right? I was understanding what this whole health picture looked like through the lens of science. And then I had the oh shit moment, right? And I had a pretty major crash on a motorbike, and this was at a track, so this wasn't on normal roads. We were going 200k down the straight, and I had full brake failure, right? So if anyone's been following us for over sort of 18 months now, this was only back in 2020, so it wasn't a very long time ago. I tore all the muscles off my shoulder, I dislocated my shoulder, but nothing else. So my spine, my pelvis, my neck, all of those things are actually still intact, and nobody could really believe it. And because I had a decent amount of muscle mass and I was able to protect that frame, there was a lot that really went into that. But it was really a moment that shifted my worldview and started to look at the bigger lessons that we can really look at from health, right? And the first one I want to share with you is you are the most important part of your day. Your calendar just does not show it. Everything is urgent, everything's going on, and everything needs your attention. But we need to take the time to see what's important and how we can add that back into our day. And then lastly, we don't have to, we get to, right? This should be something we do for us, not to us. And it really becomes a process of how we can make health a self-compassion process or an integral part of your day, and how we can get more out of how you feel, how you function, how you give to others. So before we dive in, the one thing I want you to take away from that is understanding that your body is not broken, you're just working against yourself. When we start a diet, it's not a skill set. When we look at building this understanding of what's required for long-term change for your physiology, your biology, not mine, we start to really look at the habits and skills that are required to look at this for long-term progress. And then lastly, nothing works in isolation, it has to work together. So we're going to go through, as I mentioned, the health trifecta of change and making sure we're looking at this from a bit more of a bigger picture. All right. So rather than looking at adding more stress on top and doing more things as most, we really want to be able to clean the slate a little bit, make sure that our body is in a position to actually handle that process. So going through this, we've built out a very in-depth model and understanding what this looks like. And this is a bird's eye view of what we do at the Better Project. And we're going to break down some of these concepts. I'm going to be very aware of time, but I do really want to give you some of these components of this health trifecta, really understanding what's involved and how this ties into a deeper level of health. So we're going to dive into physical first. We're going to dive into psychological, and then we're going to finish with digestive. The first one, as I mentioned, is understanding that physical component, right? So we're looking at muscle breakdown, long-term mobility, and that recovery piece. So when we look at muscle breakdown, this is something that we really need to take into account as we get older, especially over that 35, 40, both male and female, right? We really start to have to ask the questions of how much should I exercise? What's the right type of exercise? If you're currently not training at all, then a really great place to start is 1. But if you're building this up over time and you're currently training 3 or 4 times a week and you're not seeing the results from the efforts you're putting in, we want to look at this a little bit differently and make sure that we're getting the right type of exercise. One thing I really want to bring across here, guys, is that you don't get better at endurance as you get older, you just get worse at strength. And the reason I say that is we see so many people getting into the triathlon space that go from a sprint distance up to more of an endurance, half Ironman type stuff, or simply if we're running, we go to long walks and we just start to extend things longer because we don't have the ability to get into these higher intensity states. Now that is certainly not the case, but it's something that if we don't train it certainly happens over time. We get weaker, we get slower, and we may do more, longer exercise, but we just don't have that ability to lift or strengthen in the same way, and we need to be simply intentional about it. So when we look at this, we want to make sure that the biggest question we're asking is, how do we want to still be doing this in 20 years? The mountain biking, going for a weekend adventure, going for a hike, whatever that might be for you. And if you want to be able to do those things, one of the big things you need to take into account is that strength component. Muscle breakdown, as we'll dive into a little bit more today, is one of the biggest impactors of long-term, high-quality longevity, right? Meaning both long-term health, but also making sure we're in a position that we're strong, mobile, and our body's not holding us back from those day-to-day adventures. When I discuss this mobility component, we dive really, really deep in this in other trainings, but understanding that mobility is the balance or the combination of both flexibility and strength. So we need to get an awareness, and we dive very deep into this on the activations training. If you want access to the activation stuff to really walk through this and every muscle in the body and understand how to fit this back in your day, then we can add that below. Just comment activations below. We can send you that training. Or if in the description, if you're watching us on Facebook, we'll add that link in the description so you go a little bit deeper into what that looks like. But essentially, there's a big difference between that full range of motion and active range of motion, and understanding how if we create strength in the positions that we, in that range, we can start to drastically reduce our risk for injury and also keep that strength, that mobility component there. So the best way to look at this is if we are standing on ice, for example, our body senses that we're unstable, it tightens up, right? So if we can start, and if we start to look at things like our hamstrings like that, right, one muscle that everybody seems to be tight in, we need to take the time to look at why is that tight. It's not because we need to stretch the hamstrings again 10 days in a row. We need to look at what are the muscles around it that just aren't working the way they should and are creating this instability that means the hamstrings are overworking, right? Instability. So if we can build this awareness of mobility rather than just flexibility, right? Rather than continuing to stretch that muscle all the time, what can we do to improve the function of that hip? We start to really move in the right direction, and we can't do that without some level of resistance training, right? If we can really focus on the muscle over the movement, we can really start to understand that it doesn't need to be a fancy machine at a gym. It can be done from home, but it does need to be contraction so we maintain some sort of platform to work with. And then lastly, recovery. This is a really big topic, but it's something that I just want to touch on today to understand that it's something that's a really big part of that physical element where we're burning our candle from both ends. We need to balance the yin with the yang, meaning we need to balance the coffee or the stimulant that we use in the morning to wake us up with the yang, the relaxation, the recovery, and the ability to sleep at night. Is really something that's out of balance, right? We have the 1, 2, 3, 4 coffees, and we don't have the magnesium, the time with that screen, some time to unwind, to really slow down at the end of the day. And that's something we really need to balance back out so that we show up better tomorrow, right? We're in this reactive nature of our sleep's terrible because of last night's sleep. How can we make tomorrow better? Managing light, right? We spend 99% of our day in artificial lights. How can we take the time to get out in the sun, be aware of some of these lights that are really inhibiting our ability to recover and sleep? And then the last one is going to be that protein requirement, right? We are so undernourished with our protein requirements. And even looking at this from a government recommendation, we're looking at like 1.5 grams per kilo of body weight, which is to survive, right? Not to optimize, not to function at a high level, but just to survive. And this is something we need to look at a little bit more. So when we dive into the psychological element, guys, this is something that we look at from mental health. Understanding energy buckets is a really powerful component to go through, and then also that self-compassion. So mental health, this is something that one of our coaches, our mindset coach in the program, talked about with our team last week, or Tuesday, I think it was actually this week, going through the direct correlation between weight training and mental health. And it's a really, really powerful training to get an awareness of what was really going on, because he took clinically depressed people through this study, and this was with 1.2 million people. So it wasn't a small study at all. They did it with older populations, they did it with female only, they tried it with lots of different categories. And going through and understanding that through 1/3 of the people that went through general practice care, GP practice, they were able to see a 21% improvement in their clinical depression, which is awesome start. But the really, really interesting part they took into the study is that 29% improved through low intensity resistance training. Right? So really, really powerful, actually bigger improvement than that GP general practice protocol. And then lastly, the one that's really powerful is seeing that actually adding in high intensity weight training increased it by a massive 61%. Now that's not a small number, and it's not a small study, so it's really something we want to pay attention to. So seeing that direct correlation between our physical and mental health is something that's really, really powerful in that space. All right. The second part that we want to look at here is understanding, when we dive deeper into mental health, getting an idea of you can't hate yourself into shape. This is something that we really need to look at, because so many people are running away from what they don't want from their body anymore, right? They don't want the jiggly bits around the waist. They don't want the saddlebags. They don't want the low energy. They don't want to feel that way anymore, right? It's very negative, and we can't look at that as being a sustainable long-term option. If we can look at this through the lens of self-compassion and understanding what that looks like as an awareness of what we would like to look like in 5 years. What does that person look like? What does that person feel like? How does that person show up on a day-to-day basis? And what should that person be doing now? Right? Now we start to look at this from a much more holistic lens of what true long-term change really looks like. And then lastly, I want to just touch on this digestive component. This is one that people look at a ton or skip a ton, but usually want to know a lot about when we go through these trainings. So the first part, we went through this in a study a couple of months ago with our Body Reset webinar, is understanding things like antibiotics, things like sanitizers, all of these components that have been massive advancements in medical practice are life-changing, right? They save lives. They're a fantastic component for a lot of these infectious diseases that are coming through. We're seeing a really, really good reduction of this over time in the right direction, right? Through from 1950 to 2000s, we saw a significant drop in those numbers. However, what we're seeing, or the real problem that's coming through that's starting to be highlighted in this natural health space, is that we're also seeing an inverse relation with a lot of these things starting to elevate over time, where we're seeing an increase in Crohn's disease, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, right? A lot of these really high immune disorders that are really causing some big problems, right? And we've got to dive into this a little bit more, right? So understanding that this is not our genes didn't change in the last 50 years, they're still the same, but how they're expressed did, right? So our environment has really changed. So as I mentioned, there's that artificial light component. There's so many fake foods we're looking at. We're scared of germs now, especially after the last couple of years of the COVID lockdowns. We're trying to be too clean, right? 99.9% bacteria is removed. Well, that's also the good bacteria, and that's really starting to devastate our microbiome diversity and getting in the way of our ability to actually manage not just day-to-day absorption of foods, but also that ability to fight off some bigger concepts or some bigger issues. Stress and sedentary are obviously a huge part of that one as well, but on top of what we're looking at, it's a pretty big culture change. So diving into these 7 system spoilers is something we dive into a lot in trainings. I'm not going to go right into it, but really understanding that overall concept of being too clean and a lot of these medical advances is something that we really need to look at. So looking at the next step here around foods, a big part that we can start with on the digestive front is making sure that 40 to 60% of our diet currently, on average, is made up of ultra-processed foods. So looking at the refined starch that's in your meals, the free sugars, the higher refined oils is huge. And as we mentioned before, that low protein really has to be something that we look at much, much deeper. When we look at how big the gut really is and what that's managing, if you're not taking care of that, you're eating these ultra-processed foods, it's absolutely decimating your gut. And your gut is your biggest link to improving how you feel and function on a day-to-day basis. So if you're not taking that into account, you're not going to be functioning at your best, and it's going to impair your cognitive function, your energy, your mood, your sleep quality, your recovery, and so many things, because we're not taking the time to fuel our body with high-quality stuff. So the main issues that are coming through here, guys, is understanding that if it's not produced naturally, it won't be absorbed naturally. If it's foreign to the body, it will be tagged as a foreign substance and it will really start to cause a lot more inflammation. And if this is continuing to happen, it will really start to be a chronic problem, right? If you don't mask it with another acid reflux Gaviscon or another probiotic, for example, find out what that problem actually is. And this is something we help our clients with a lot of time, to really find out what's damaging that gut lining and how to rebuild that space. So looking at this around understanding that it really comes back to nutrients and foods. If there's one thing that improves your ability to remove the cravings and the energy crashes and this constant overconsumption of foods, we really need to start looking at higher quality foods and knowing what we fuel our body best on. All right. So when we look at this overall picture, we look at what's actually below the iceberg. Don't just focus on diet and exercise, and if that's not working, do more of it. We're taking the time to look at this smarter approach of fueling the body and creating day-to-day movement, actually integrating that into our day. When we start to look deeper, we can actually realize how much of an impact this is having on hormones, gut health, that looking at that toxicity aspect, which is huge, and then looking at that overall stress and breaking it down into those three pieces. So this one's really short, guys, but I just wanted to share you with a big part of today's training that we had some really, really good feedback on, was understanding what this really looks like. So one, the root cause has to be the start, not just another patch fix. How can we make sure this is a long-term approach? The second one is counting calories and nutrients, not calories, right? Really understanding the more broad picture of health and heading in the right direction. There's no long-term wealth without health. This is a really, really important point that came up with our business owners today, is taking the time to look at this through the lens of, if you're working so hard in your day-to-day job and all the things that need to be done today urgently, but we're not taking into account the bigger picture important stuff, meaning our body coming along for the ride, we're really missing the bigger point. And then lastly, mental and physical work together or against each other, but you need to make sure that they're out or understand that they are integrated, and they really start to get in the way if you don't look at them that way. All right. So hopefully today highlighted a couple components that looks at the bigger picture of health here, and just understanding that every one of you individually is going to have a different journey here, but understanding a platform must be in play before we get fancy is something I really want to walk through. So if today highlighted a couple of components that you're interested in diving a little bit deeper into, I'd love to have this conversation with you and actually understand what that looks like a little bit more, and actually walk this through with you on a one-to-one call and actually apply the entire path to you. What I wanted to do from this call is just give you a ton of clarity around what are the components you're focusing on right now that aren't moving the lever in the right direction, and what are some smarter, more sustainable steps that you could consider to really make a better step forward. If that allows you to create some clarity around that, understand what this looks like as a next step, fantastic. If you want to dive deeper into this and really understand integrating this in with some structure, some accountability, or even diving into your blood work and looking at the big picture of health so that you actually have a body that you still feel great and still proud of in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, then this is going to be something we do every day. This is something we've helped thousands of clients with now, and we can walk you through this process a lot more. So if you want to go through this whole process, simply just comment health trifecta below, and I'll send you through both this full training, send through the activations, and if you want to apply to jump on a call with us, we can walk through this entire process a little bit further as well. But for anyone watching this, guys, love to have you all on. Good to see a couple watching right through. It's been a really big day, but I just wanted to share a couple of things with you around what we've gone through and a lot of the things that we're developing with our program. I think we're really getting to a point that this is truly getting world class, and we're helping an immense amount of people in the space, that I just want to share a couple of those thought processes, a couple of those deeper concepts with you to make sure we're on the same track. So like I said, my name's Ollie. I'm from the Meta Project, and diving deeper into understanding your body, your health, and integrating it back into your day is a huge part of this process that is usually missed. And going from science and unpacking that into how that fits into your day-to-day life is something that we do every single day. So if we can help you out, like I said, comment below health trifecta, and we can see how we can help you a little bit more. Otherwise, I'll add the link to that activations component from the first part of today as well. And I hope you're having a great week, guys. It's been a big one here. I'm tired, but everything's going well. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your week and weekend, and we'll talk again next week. See you guys. Bye.